Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Between Two Consultants. My name is Nicholas Kelly,
And I'm Ethan Silvers.
and today we're talking about the topic of how sales and marketing has evolved in the biopharma sector. And we're very fortunate to have Dan Yip with us today to talk about that. So, Dan, could I ask you for a real quick intro?
Sure. Hi, Nick and Ethan. Thanks for having me today.
You're
My
welcome.
name is Dan Yip. Thank you. I have been working exclusively in the pharma industry and sales and marketing for the entire 20 years of my career. Started off at a large pharma company in a pharmaceutical sales position. Then gradually got my foot in the door in marketing, and now currently head up sales planning and marketing at a small biopharmaceutical company based outside of Pennsylvania, called Madrigal Pharmaceuticals, focused on liver disease.
Awesome. Dan, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. And you were talking
Sure.
about that 25 years of experience you've had, and um, I'd love to hear a little bit about, what was it like at the start? What was like sales and marketing like at the inception of your career 25 years ago?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think
Thank you.
obviously the industry's changed and transformed a lot. I think if I were to try to put a finger on it, I think it's probably two things that I'll generally talk about thematically. I think one is, in the late '90s, early 2000s, most of the industry was dominated by several large household name like pharmaceutical companies. They were, for the most part, focused on pretty highly prevalent disorders, like things like, cholesterol or asthma or a lot of these kind of big therapeutic areas. The general promotional plan, if you will, back during that period was to hire as many sales reps as you could, and then basically put them in front of key prescribers, whether they're primary care, family practitioners, or even specialists, depending on the disease that you're operating in. And you do a lot of direct to consumer education. If you're fortunate enough to have a large budget and you have a big therapeutic area, you do it on television, radio, things like that. I think the first sort of big shift that we've seen over the past 2 decades is a saturation of a lot of these markets, right? You have now, multiple therapeutic options for treating, asthma or any of those large, conditions. So you basically see a saturation of these markets, and now the industry is sort of divert towards areas of critical unmet need, if you will. And a lot of those areas tend to be smaller, more niche, specialized areas, either because there are so many therapies that are available, they are now relegated to treating unmet need in very specialized populations, or like in the case of rare diseases, there are a lot of smaller market conditions that have a lot of morbidity, mortality associated with it, that have been sort of not been a focus of industry because they're not deemed to be terribly lucrative because of the size. So basically, over the past 2 decades, you've seen sort of a move away from a lot of these larger therapeutic markets that have been largely satisfied, to much more niche indications, whether they're subpopulations of a large therapeutic area, or there are sort of these conditions where nobody was thrilled to invest a lot of money in it because there are maybe a few thousand patients as opposed to a few 100,000 or millions. So I think that's one trend. I think the other trend is obviously, with the rise of digital and access to information. I think consumers or patients have become much more empowered in treatment decision making. So it used to be you did whatever your physician told you, right? Because our society tends to put physicians on a pedestal, and so what they say is the gospel, and that's the end of it. I think a lot of information, obviously now, like any other industry, is being democratized. So patients are now getting access to therapies that they asked for, that they researched about themselves. So I think sales and marketing has also shifted to, not just purely focus on the healthcare provider, but also, understanding the other stakeholders involved. And then a third kind of smaller piece is also the rise of payers in the U.S. and the controls that a lot of these public and private payers have instituted in a sophisticated way to manage spending and determine sort of when therapy should be used, which patients should be used for. So I think it's gotten a lot more complicated in that there are a lot more people involved in the decision-making process.
Dan, you might have been referring to this towards the end of what you were saying. So, because you were doing sales at GSK and then you were doing marketing at Genentech, you sort of saw a lot in terms of what it was like to be on the sales side, and then through marketing also what it meant to do sales. And I know that a lot has changed with regulations and what has been allowed from when you started as just a wee pup at GSK, or a wee lad, as Nick might say. So like, what was it like then when you were in this like wild times of doing sales and where it is now?
Yeah, I mean, I think you alluded to it, Ethan. The pharma industry, I think behind maybe like aerospace and others is a very highly regulated industry, right? So as much innovation as you see in a lot of different industries, I think the lens of innovation in pharma and biopharma is a little bit muted compared to that, simply because obviously at the end of the day, we aim to kind of deliver value to patients, and there has to be a rightful approach to do that. I think what's really changed though is just the sophistication in how we go about generating appropriate demand for products, right? So at the end of the day, I think most of the American public assumes that, if you have a disease and there is a drug that is used to treat that disease, that, that drug is going to be used in the appropriate patients. And I think there's it's a lot more complicated than that. And I say that because I justify my own existence as a marketing professional. But I think at the end of the day, so much of what we do in marketing and so much of what we do in sales is really appropriate education, right? Because at the end of the day, we don't make the treatment choice. We just want to make basically publicly available information, manageable and understandable to, patients and physicians, right? Because at the end of the day, if you think about your average, let's not even talk specialists, let's talk your average, primary care physician who you guys, I'm sure, see 2 or 3 times a year, right, to get your physicals. You think about sort of the breadth of diseases this person has to understand and be able to recognize basically in a moment's notice and send you down the right diagnostic journey to make sure whatever you have is being managed appropriately. It's a lot to take into consideration. So really how sales and marketing involved is how to figure out new innovative channels to get the right information to the right stakeholder at the right time. And it sounds like a very generalized philosophy, but there's a lot of time we spend in combing through data and analytics to find the right insights to craft a certain message so it hits a reader on the other side of the screen or the other end of the conversation, right, so that they can do what they think is right for the patient. So much of that is just like contextualizing and educating people on what is actually available everywhere.
Awesome, Dan. I just want to pick up on something you talked about, using data and analytics, and obviously it's a field that's going nowhere. So we're just cautioning you on using data to make any kind of decisions.
It's a fad, just like the internet.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah,
it's like Y2K.
It's one of those, and it's just we like to share what we're hearing. So just an FYI on that, Dan. See, you talked about the change in the digital landscape, people going online, getting access to information, and that evolution you were just talking about, how it's shifting. Would you see that as is that one of the largest drivers, or is it the main driver of the that evolution of sales and marketing? Is it being driven by that access to information? Are there other things that are also driving it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's
Thank you.
a pretty timely question because I think one of the big things that's a big trend and that's impacting what we do in the industry is obviously the reemergence from COVID, right? So, for the past year, we've all been stuck indoors, limited face-to-face interactions. That has a pretty big impact on the pharmaceutical business model where really we are mostly, so much of our demand is generated through in-person interactions between reps and physicians. When, these physicians are being pulled into managing COVID and academic institutions and practices are shut down, people are furloughed, that interrupts the entire model. But what it's actually done is it's accelerated a trend that we've already saw before COVID, which is, telemedicine, right? Using different channels to access, attention, right? Because essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to get a physician who sees, 20 patients a day to put their eyeballs on either your product or your disease state for a very limited amount of time. So information has now been kind of, reduced to bite-sized pieces where timing and placement become kind of the most prominent thing to do. So, even like in my previous position, we were planning a launch like in July of last year. Like in the peak of COVID, we were going to launch a theoretically blockbuster drug when every single one of our reps was sitting at home in their PJ, right? So how do you flip on a dime, and all the playbooks that you used in launching drugs previously were no longer valid because now you basically have to do everything virtually. So I think COVID has sort of accelerated the trend where now, I think most organizations where, like what they call non-personal promotion, which is sort of a synonym for digital, that used to be sort of an add-on to sales promotion, like in-person promotion. Now a lot of brands that's sort of the fundamental piece of promotion, and reps are just as important. So I think it's really forced the industry to think about how they invest, in promoting drugs appropriately.
So let's talk about some of the pros and cons, Dan. So you've seen in your illustrious career, you have seen, and feel free to riff on that, Nick, if you want, Dan's you've seen a ton of change going from like more reps to now what you're calling non-personal promotion. It's how I live my life, non-personally. And just like on any of the things that you brought up, it could be clinical trials, it could be doing more in-person sales versus not. Any of the things that you brought up, the pros and cons of what you're seeing of how it was when you started 25 years ago to what it's like now.
Yeah, I think, so I think let's maybe start with the pros. So I think first is just, it's the natural sort of wave that we're all riding, right? I mean, we spend a ton of time in front of our computer screens, in front of our phones. It has become a pretty dominant way in which we communicate and keep updated with each other. And it's no different professionally. So we're kind of meeting where people are already going, right? So from that sense, a pro is that, there are many established channels, some that are specific to healthcare, some that are not, like, Facebook, Instagram, like Pandora, all that kind of stuff. There are established channels for you to tap into to get to your audience. So that's a pro. I think it's also a pro in that you have a better ability to measure ROI. So, we had talked a little bit about analytics. It's frankly very scary in terms of what information you can buy on people. I'm not saying that in healthcare you can, but generally speaking, I think, your digital footprint gives, advertisers generally a lot of understanding of your preferences, how you like to get information, digital impressions, as in how many times you've seen certain something. So it becomes a much more cost-effective way of getting attention to your message. And it becomes much more cost-effective than, hiring full-time employees to go, promote your drug in many circumstances, right? Especially in the age of, more and more medical practices and academic institutions are shutting their doors to traditional sales reps. This becomes sometimes a much more preferred way to get your message out. So it can be more cost effective. You can see sort of the impact of what you invest. Maybe moving over to the cons, I think a lot of times most of these channels are much more one directional, in the sense that, like, I'm creating a video that you can watch anytime you want, so it's on demand, but it doesn't really give you a lot of opportunity to interact with your customer, which obviously is a key piece, and why I do think that there are always going to be sales professionals in our industry, because sometimes it's not just the information, but the dialogue in terms of, follow-up questions. If a physician wants to ask if this patient might be appropriate for this drug, like, that's a lot of the utility of what a sales professional adds. So there's a lot of times not a lot of back and forth. There's still obviously some physicians that are still resistant to change, right? They don't get their CME credits online as much as others. They don't adopt technology as quickly and readily as other people do. So there's always going to be that segment of the population that you're not necessarily going to have much impact on. So.
Awesome. Dan, thanks for that. Look, before we wrap
Sure.
up, there is as we know, the first episode of Between Two Consultants recently left the Milky Way galaxy, and a lot of people are concerned about the attention that's going to draw to Earth from other civilizations. Is there any kind of advice or approach you would take to, how you would shift the sales and marketing approach for biopharma in the future, in the advent of some more advanced civilizations coming to Earth?
Well, it's a really good question. Because it is a really good question. I mean, by the way, that's what I always say when you ask a question. So take that with a grain of salt. We should talk about Martians on our next podcast, because I have some very strong thoughts about that, which might actually reverse all the expertise that you think you're getting right now. Mm-hmm. But look, I think, maybe to put a bow on it, I think, sales and marketing continues to evolve. I think COVID, like I said, continues to accelerate that change. To be honest, like, I do think that, leveraging digital and leveraging data analytics is going to be sort of something that is already happening now, but will continue to really permeate in our industry. And so when you think about, right now, there isn't a ton of partnership, quite frankly, between healthcare delivery institutions and pharmaceutical companies, right? Because healthcare delivery institutions are focused on patient care. They just see pharma as, like, you're out there peddling your drugs. But I think when you see more partnerships evolve between those two, where appropriate data can be shared back and forth, I think it's gonna make delivering the right drug to the right patient much more efficient in the future. And maybe one day, God forbid, like, somebody like me is gonna be out of a job. But hopefully that's after I retire, and after the residuals run out on this podcast right here.
Dan Yip, thank you so much for joining us. My name's Ethan Silvers.
I'm Nicholas Kelly.
Thanks for joining us on Between Two Consultants. Have a great time, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Have
you.
a good one.
Bye.